Hello, world.
Woohoo!
Okay, so this is the first episode of Angular Air. We're super excited to get started. With us today, we have Brad Green.
Hello.
Igor Minar.
Minar. Hello.
Excuse me, Igor. Pete Bacon Darwin.
Hi.
Todd Motto.
Yeah, you got it right.
And I'm Kent C. Dodds, and Todd and I are your hosts today. So we're going to go ahead and start off first by introducing ourselves and the show, what we're doing. Oh, hey, we're getting Miško. Hello, Miško.
Hey, how's it going?
Joined just in
Thank
time.
you for joining us. You're just in time. We just introduced everybody else, so just say hi.
Hello, how's it going?
Good, awesome. Okay, so we're just going to introduce the show really quick. Todd and I will introduce ourselves, why we're doing this, and then we'll get into the intros of the Angular team and start talking about Angular. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first, Todd?
Hello, everybody. So I'm Todd. I live in England, work for a company called AppsBroker. We're a Google partner. We use Angular pretty much on all of our projects, so quite heavily involved in sort of writing articles and stuff about Angular, and kind of led me to take it a bit further and do something like this. So here we are. That's me. You can catch me on Twitter as well, at Todd. Window doesn't work, so unfortunately it doesn't display. And to you, Ken?
All right, yeah, so my name is Kent C. Dodds. I work for a company called Alianza in Utah, and Todd just tweeted that he wanted to do a hangout thing with panelists about Angular, and like, hey dude, let's do this, and a couple months later we're actually doing it now. So we're super stoked. I love the Angular community. I love what Angular has done for me as a web developer, and so it's good to give back. You can find me on Twitter at Kent C. Dodds, and yeah, that's and then also definitely want to encourage everybody to follow Angular Air on Twitter as well, so that you can keep up to date with the episodes that we have coming up. We've already started planning the next couple of months ahead, and we're super stoked with what we have coming down the pipe. So with that, Todd, do you want to talk about? Oh, actually, yeah, I think we're good. So now we'll just jump into the intros of our guests here. First, Brad, do you want to introduce yourself and your role with Angular?
Sure. I'm Brad Green. I'm an engineering director here at Google. And Miško and I started this project a long time ago. I say Miško actually started it, but we've been together on this Angular trek since the beginning, and we're super excited to be here now, so thanks for having us.
Thank you, Brad. Igor.
Hey, I'm Igor. I work on Angular. I've been working on Angular for over 4 years now, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Miško.
Hi, I'm Miško. I am, I guess, the guy who you can blame for all of this.
We thank you. Cool. All right, and Pete.
Hi, I'm Pete. So I've been working with the Angular team for just over a year now. And
Really? More?
I've been working
way more than a year.
Years, but I've been actually on the team proper for over a year now. And I've just recently taken on the role of looking after wont.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Hey.
Awesome. So we've got a couple of plugs before we get started. You can check out our website, ng-air.github.io. I think we'll buy a domain name at some point, but we'll want to get the buzz driving first. We've got some Google moderator panels in there as well, so you can actually submit questions for upcoming shows and stuff. So if there's something that might be relevant for an upcoming show, people can upvote it and stuff. So definitely check that out if you've got something burning to ask in the future. We've also got an IRC channel, just #NGAir, no hyphen in that one. And as Kent's already said, grab us on Twitter at AngularAir. and I can't remember the Google Plus page because it's got a big long number in it. So let's dive into what we got planned. We want to start sort of picking your guys' brains on the future of the wont branch. I know it's great to have Pete join us here. So, I mean, we're all quite interested in sort of the life cycle of Angular and the wont branch in particular. Like, what are the kind of plans going forward with those releases? Like, are they going to be a 1.4, 1.5? So a bit about that would be fantastic, really.
Okay, so I took over this role on the 4th of November, so just a couple of weeks ago. The initial plans are to continue to roll out weekly bug fixes for 1.3 and 1.2, really focusing on 1.3. There are definitely some features in the pipeline, some larger than others, and we're currently starting to look at whether 1.4 is a good idea and when that should be released. We can probably talk about some of the bigger features that we're looking at the moment. Unless you guys want to jump in here, I'll continue. So,
go for it.
Brian Ford, who's one of our awesome guys who built things like Angular Batarang and ng-hint and so on, is currently looking at backporting the Angular 2 router into 1.x. This is going to take on all of the amazing ideas that are going into the Angular 2 router, and will build on top of ideas that came out of the UI router and so on. This is definitely something that's...
Yeah, we actually saw first demos of the new router yesterday or day before yesterday. So Brian is going to share a preview publicly soon. We want to build some applications to contrast the differences between what you do with the current router today and what you will do with the new router and what the new possibilities are. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome. So is that a total rewrite of the router?
Yes. What we actually already have good chunk of the router implemented for Angular 2. And we are backporting that and transpiling it. Actually, we're trying to use a single code base and transpile out of that router that would work also for Angular 1. And we are pretty close to having it in a working state. So first demos are working, and there's a lot of polish to be still done, but it's not that far away. So I'm pretty excited about that.
And if you haven't been following us, we have put a tremendous amount of research into this router. The first one that we built for Angular was an initial attempt, and it was quite simplistic. And we've taken a look at some of the successes with projects like UI Router, but looked at other frameworks, looked at backend frameworks, and we pulled it all together into something we're excited about. I don't know, Pete, Igor, you want to talk about the specific features?
Right. So the main ones are nested and parallel routing, something that was not possible. The whole router is state-based, which makes many things easier. And also, we're going to have things like automated link generation, so you don't need to hard code links and URLs in your application.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely useful features in what I've been doing with UI Router. So yeah, that's good to hear that it's going to be developed by the Angular core and have that kind of support.
Sure.
Another big project which is ticking along in the background. We had a meeting today, in fact. We're trying to look at improving our internationalization support. And Chirai, who's another AngularJS Google member, is spearheading a design document at the moment. And we had a meeting today with a number of the major people in the community who've been, and at Google, who've been using internationalization with Angular. And we're looking to try and create something which is better than Angular Translate and better than Google Translate and what we've got in Angular 1.x at the moment. And hopefully this will also work in the same way for 1.x and 2. So this is a work in progress, but this is definitely an exciting area that we're looking at the moment.
When do you see these features kind of landing? They're going to be in the new year, do you think, or?
So the design document is going to be made public very soon. I think Churai is going to be working on it in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
And then from there, depending on how complex it is, I mean, there are lots of moving parts in internationalization. It's a really complicated area with potential server-side issues, which we have to think about. So depending on how complex it is, then we'll put together some kind of timeline on how things are going to pan out.
Right. So I think the plan is to break this down. So first do the initial research. Like, we have some experience in this area, but we still need to do more. Break this down into smaller steps, and then start working on some of the code. And my goal is to get something out there so that people can try it by the end of the year, and then gather feedback and see if that's good enough or if we need to iterate more. It's definitely a very complex topic. Like, if anybody knows about internationalization, they know that it's not something super simple. So we don't know when it's going to be done. So it's something that we really want to get done right and as soon as possible.
Cool. Awesome. So, Pete, what about how long are you going to be working on Angular 1.x? How long is that project going to stay alive and be updated?
I think as long as the community needs a 1.x, I think there should be people working on it and improving it. How much time we spend looking at that will probably start to drop off as Angular 2 becomes available and more popular. Certainly for the next few months, we're working at the same pace as we were before 1.3 was released. There's a team of us, about 10 of us now, working substantial hours each week, a few of us full-time. And this is going to continue through into next year. As we get a better idea of how 2 is release schedule is coming, then we will start to give you more information about the life cycle of 1.x.
Do you think when 2.0 kind of starts shifting the percentage of usage, do you think the 1.x branch is going to sort of become more community-based, or do you think that Google will still have quite a big involvement?
Well, one of my main aims, actually, over the next few months is to really continue to engage in the community. Igor has put a lot of effort in over the last 12 months to try and get more connected to the community, and I think that is something that we have to do more so. And I can imagine that we will want to bring in more people to help with triaging and bug fixing and so on. It's definitely a requirement for us to continue to scale.
At the same time, I think it's hard to imagine a lot of community involvement without support from people who've been core members to make some of the big changes or hard bug fixes possible. So one of the things I said at NG Europe was that we intend to support the 1.x branch for as long as, I think like Pete said, as long as people are interested, and certainly well beyond when we release 2.0.
Right. But also, historically speaking, our experience from Angular 1 and Angular 1.2 tells us that these old versions of Angular decreases very quickly after there is a new version. So our goal is to make the migration from 1x to 2x as good as possible. Many people ask about the migration path, and we can talk about it later. We don't know what it is, but we want people to make it to 2.0 as quickly as they can, and that will also reduce the pressure on keeping 1x up and maintained, and many people around to work on that code base. So.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a bunch of sort of the corporates where we can't use like the 2.0 and ES6. There's going to be that. I think it's going to be around for quite a while yet.
Right, but also in my experience, many of those people, they just maintain their own forks. I don't know if I would like their patches and stuff to be contributed back to the master repository, but often my experience is that many of the hardcore enterprise corporations, they just maintain their own thing, and that's what they prefer. So if that's what they want to do, then that's one of the options.
Oh, that's interesting. I know that lots of corporations need to support older versions of IE, and so lots of them won't even be able to upgrade to 1.3 anyway, which is too bad for them, honestly. That's sad. But awesome. Okay, is there anything else you want to talk about with 1.x, or should we move on to other topics?
I think we should also talk about the material design effort, because that's another big area where we're spending a lot of time on this. I don't know how many of you know, but material design is our implementation of the material design UX specification from Google. So there's this specification that designers and UI designers and user experience designers developed, and now people at Google are building implementations for this specification. So there's a Android Lollipop, and we have one. There is one for iOS, I believe. And we're trying to build a suite of components that you can use to start building applications very quickly, and just don't worry about the layout and the user interaction, because all of that is already predefined and prepackaged for you. So all you do is just drop these components together, glue them, and then provide the business logic necessary for the application. So we've been working on this project for half a year now, I believe. We got quite far, and there's still a lot of more work to be done, but our goal is to complete this suite for Angular 1x, and then later on, once 2.0 is more mature, port it over and ship 2.0 with material design components as well. So this is one of the areas that people interested in beautiful design should keep an eye on, and you can visit material.angularjs.org to see what we have so far and what we are doing.
Awesome. And that'll just be like any other module developed by the core team as a like ng messages or ng aria. You include it if you want it. You don't have to. It doesn't ship with it.
Exactly. It's a separate module. It's on a separate release train. So there's even a separate team. Like the core team is involved in development, but there are dedicated developers working on these components, and they have their own release schedule. So you can use this stuff if you want. If you don't have to use it, we don't force you.
Cool. And one thing that I think is way cool about it is I know Marcy Sutton is one of the contributors, and she's a big accessibility. I guess she's an accessibility consultant for the project, and I think that's way cool that you're thinking about accessibility in that way. It's something that we don't think about as much as we should. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So anything else before we move on to Angular 2? Okay. So my first question is for Miško. Miško, do you feel like we're killing your precious baby by rewriting this thing that you've built, or what are your thoughts on rewriting what you created?
I don't think of it as killing my precious baby. I think it's my second baby. So the motivations, we kind of always have to roll back and say, what are the motivations for this particular thing? And it really comes down to that we see the future being web components, ECMAScript 6, and browsers being more playing a larger role in the ecosystems. And if you look forward, certain decisions we have made in the AngularJS 1x were pre-ES6 and web components, and as a result, they don't really play nice with these particular things. And so Angular 2 is really kind of a rethought of like, okay, given that this world is coming, how can we be best prepared for it so that we can mostly take advantage of it? And so everything from a different syntax is really driven from this fundamental need to be able to support web components because we think that it is the future.
There's another aspect to this. When we started thinking about our next version of Angular, we're driven in two directions. So one, of course, is mobile. It's the thing that if you're trying to make money, you're probably investing in some mobile strategy. And a lot of folks want to build their apps in a hybrid way so they can deliver them to multiple architectures. And so we're looking hard at the performance aspects of mobile, how to make it easy, how to end-to-end make Angular well-suited for that out, and it may sound like it's at odds, but at the same time, we're looking at larger and larger applications. Certainly within Google here, we're seeing teams of tens and maybe over 100 people working on Angular apps. And we need to build some structures to make it easier for them to interact. And it turns out that a lot of the motivations, a lot of the technologies for both the small and the large are the same.
That's really interesting. So what you're telling me is the web platform is changing, and we have to change with it. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much. I think if we don't change, we are risking becoming irrelevant.
Totally. And
I'm sure that many people are going to disagree with the statement that a web platform is changing, because all these changes are backwards compatible, so it's not like there's going to be a new version of web or something like that. But the thing to remember is that all of the current solutions that we have were built with certain assumptions in mind, and those assumptions used to be valid but are no longer valid in this new world. And if we want to take advantage of all these new technologies, all these new APIs, and just everything cool that is coming with ES6 and web components, you really need to rethink, how we want developers to build applications. And that doesn't mean that we're going to change the core concepts. It really, for the most part, all of the changes in Angular are syntactical. There are some semantical changes, but those are very few. But at the heart of it, Angular will still be what it is today. So things like dependency injection and template-driven application assembly, extensible HTML, all those things will be preserved. Maybe you'll just need different APIs to invoke them or to declare your intents. But under the hood, at the very core, it's still the same framework that you came to love.
Yeah, so we've seen a couple of articles going around about the syntax changes. I thought this would get some giggles. So, I quite like the new syntax changes. I know I watched your talk on how it binds to properties and all that kind of stuff. So, there's a lot to cover in a talk to cover the whole 2.0. So, is there anything? A lot of people are used to the ng-click and all this stuff. Is there anything driving the sort of the brace syntax and the square bracket syntax that we actually need to actually wake up and realize that this is a good thing rather than just, oh, it looks hideous?
Do you want to start and then I'll fill in?
Yes. So the driving force really is the web components. Web components basically means that you have a DOM. And a DOM might be something different than what you have expect, because it might be a tab or a pane or some kind of a widget or pull-down menu, etc. And so the DOM might have APIs that you haven't seen before. And if you look at these APIs, really the web components say that you're extending the DOM by really adding properties and methods to it. So just like an input has a method which is focus and has a property called value, your pull-down menu or a fancy input box might have similar kinds of properties. And so we need a mechanism without actually understanding if we have a particular element in hand, whether that element is web component or not. We need a mechanism to bind to it and invoke methods on it. And the old syntax kind of presumes that every time you have a web component, you will have to create a set of kind of glue bindings, glue directives. Suppose the component creates an event called focused, right? There is no ng-focused, so how are you going to get that? Are you going to be expected to create a new directive every time you come across a web component that creates a new event? And so these are the kind of driving forces that are pushing us towards coming up with a unified syntax that works just as well for web components as it does for the existing philosophy of Angular. Igor?
So many people look at this and they're like, oh, this looks so different, this is horrible, and they think that many of these decisions are arbitrary, but they're not. Miško kind of described some of this. And one of our goals is really to be able to analyze templates and be able to tell apart string literals from expressions, for example, and find Angular-specific things in a template. So this is something that is not possible with the current syntax, and it worked fine. Like it was actually it was one of the things that I was criticizing when I joined the project 4.5 years ago, and Miško somehow through his magical ability to talk to people convinced me that it was not a big problem, but it is a big problem now with the components, and that's why we need to change. But there is a issue on GitHub, and for people who are interested in discussion, I suggest that you follow issue 133 on Angular/Angular repository. And there we laid out the criteria that we need to meet in order to create a syntax that will work for all of these intended use cases that we have. And one of them is that the HTML needs to be valid. And even though it looks surprising to many people, the bracket and the parentheses syntax around the attribute name is valid HTML. You can check HTML spec, and it is valid HTML. We, however, came across this weird corner case where the DOM specification for set attribute method disallows brackets and parentheses in the attribute name. So even in the spec, there are these corner cases that we discovered and we need to deal with. We have workarounds for them, and we're also talking to W3C to see if this could be fixed in the spec. But we're also open to considering other proposals as long as they meet the criteria that we laid out. So if anybody's interested in joining the discussion, issue 133, we have, I think, 5 or 6 criteria that we are currently considering as must-have. And if you have alternative proposal that matches all the criteria, we'll be happy to consider it.
And I want to add something else to it, which is that there's really 2 discussions going on, which is the discussion of semantics of how the system should work, and then there's the discussion of what the actual syntax is for expressing these things. And it's kind of amusing that all of these conversations really come down to like, oh, I like the period versus a colon versus a semicolon. It's like, it's just syntax, people. Like, it's really not that important. Whereas the semantics of it, what does it mean, are extremely important. And that's the kind of feedback that we're actually not getting, and I would love to get more feedbacks on the semantics of it. I mean, whether you put square brackets or you put bind dash, and whether you put underscore or colon, really is a secondary thing that we can agree on once we agree on the semantics of it all.
Awesome. Yeah, that was good. So actually, Igor, what you were talking about with the funny DOM APIs being kind of inconsistent, that leads us to our next question we want to talk about is browser support for Angular 2.0. So there are really awesome ES6 features leaking into the implementation of Angular, and so how long do you think we're going to need to transpile down to ES5, and like what's the browser support going to be like for Angular 2.0?
So we really have our eyes set on evergreen browsers, which currently means IE11 and newer, so all the Firefox and Chrome and mobile browsers. We might need to make some exceptions about mobile browsers depending on the current, because we are targeting mobile browsers very aggressively. We'll see what the situation is there like. But really, IE11 is currently the baseline. It might work on IE10. We'll see. It's too early to tell. But my hope is that the transpilation will, with time, go away. There might be need for some, or let me say it this way. I think right now we need to transpile many things, and as time goes, we will need to transpile less and less and less. And eventually there might be a day when there's no transpilation needed at all. But the way we are building this, we are very sensitive to the developer workflow, and we care a lot about good debugging story. Like, I don't think that the current state of source maps is awesome and is sufficient for good debugging. And one thing we're trying really hard is that if you need to debug any of the output that we transpile, you should be able to debug it, because you should see it as your code that was slightly modified, but you should still be able to recognize 90% of the code as yours. There might be something around your code, but we definitely want to make the debugging story very easy. And the way we are setting up the transpilation, we're very sensitive to latency. So we don't want to wait 5 minutes for my application to transpile. That's totally unacceptable. So we're looking for times in milliseconds, in tens of milliseconds. 100 milliseconds is already too slow for me. I'm very sensitive to stuff like this, and good developer workflow is a high priority for us.
Hey, Igor, I think we should also make something else explicit, which is that even today, you will not need to transpile anything. As a developer who chooses to use Angular, you can definitely use ES5 or something like that. So you don't need to transpile. The fact that Angular is written in this transpiled ES6 atscript kind of language, which we think might be beneficial to you, does not mean that you actually have to use this. So just to be very clear, as a developer of Angular 2, you will not have to transpile if you don't want to. If you do, we think we can bring some benefits to you, syntactic sugar for you that will make it easier, but you don't have to transpile.
Right. There is a good reason why there are syntactic changes happening in ES6. It makes the code more direct. It allows you to express your intents better. And we think that the syntax is just going to be way better with ES6 and atscript. But if that's not your thing, if you want to keep on using ES5, you'll still be able to do it. It's going to be and maybe with some helper functions or helper utility libraries, we'll be able to even reduce the verbosity of the code. But in general, like our goal is to make this ecosystem that is very inclusive. So if you want to use ES5, you should be able to use ES5. If you want to use CoffeeScript, you should be able to use CoffeeScript. TypeScript, sure, go for it. We have our preferences, but people have others, and we don't want to exclude those people.
Yeah, so you mentioned atscript a couple of times. I only come across this probably about a month and a half ago. There was quite a nice article on ES6 2.0 and atscript. So how does, the way I see it, atscript is kind of an extension on the 2.0. What are the, like, how does it work? What is atscript to people who have never actually heard of it?
When you say 2.0, you mean 2.0 of what?
Angular 2.0.
Okay.
I can talk about that. So we all know ES5, we know and love it. We also know that ES6 is coming down the line, which adds mainly things like class and var and let and a few other things. And so you can get in a transpiler such as Tracer that will allow you to essentially polyfill the ES6 into ES5 browser of today. Now TypeScript, which are the guys at Microsoft, they did a wonderful thing where they added a type system on top of that. And this becomes important when you are trying to talk to large teams, 10 plus people on a project and of code. And by adding type system, you can be a lot more expressive. But the other thing we really care about is that we want to make sure that you as a developer can really express the intent. Prime example of this is the directed definition object, which is super complicated. It's much better expressed to something like annotations. So the idea is you take ES6 plus TypeScript plus annotations, and you package it up with introspection at runtime to a language that is very familiar, it's just an extension of, and it's something that you could actually see that the browsers of the future could eventually end up in. And this is what you package it up, and you bring it up basically from the future to today and say, here, this is what we think a future might look like. Have a go at it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that Todd mentioned that he sees it as an extension to Angular 2, but we really try to make it a separate project. It's a complementary project to Angular, but our goal is to build this language and the set of tools around the language so that you can use it without Angular as well. And for example, if you have a server-side application that runs on Node.js, you should be able to use atscript and get all the benefits of types and annotations and all that stuff. We were looking at Express, and we think that Express would be a really good use case, good candidate for changing the APIs to use annotations. So there's a potential there. And there are many projects that could just benefit from these language additions that we are building on top of TypeScript.
Awesome. Yeah, I believe types are super helpful in big teams for sure. So you mentioned that it did that it does some checking at runtime. So does that script require some like runtime library that you need to include in your app if you're using atscript?
It's part of the tracer that gets generated. There's also an assertion library actually gets compiled away in production mode. It's only in the development mode when you want to have these assertions. So there is nothing really that's getting added to your application at the end of the day when you push the production button.
But
Cool.
Miško, maybe talk a little bit about how we see this evolving and that we want to bring other folks into the game.
Right. So the way we see this evolving is that the ECMAScript committee kind of agreed that colon syntax, the syntax that the TypeScript has started with, or rather they reused the really ES4 syntax. It's kind of the way the syntax should go for type system. And most people in the community agree that some form of an optional type system is something that will be beneficial to JavaScript. Whether you look at it from the point of view of the VM vendors, which could use the types to improve the speed, or from project developers, from the developers themselves who can use it as working on larger projects, and larger in both sense in lines of code and larger in the sense of number of contributors on a project. That I think community agrees is a good idea. And so I think what we're going to see over the next couple of years is that there will be an effort into standardization for the type system into ECMAScript standard. And so by painting a particular picture of what the world might look like, we are both enabling it and also just saying, hey, we're not saying this is the solution, but like look at all the benefits you can gain to it, and it makes it a lot more likely that something like this will happen in the future.
Right. And also from experience, we know that standardization is much easier if you have 1, 2, or 3 implementations for a particular concept out there already. So by being guinea pigs, we are hoping to inform the standardization process. And we're working very well with the TypeScript guys, and we are hoping together we can get this to TC39 and propose it as a standard.
Cool. Yeah. I think, is there anything else you wanted to talk about with atscript, or we have one other thing that we wanted to cover before we go to Q&A? Okay, great. So this is the big one, migration path. So take it away. Migration path from 1.x to 2.0.
I think we've said this a couple times, but the best thing is we want to ask for some space. Please let us build 2.0 before we figure out how we're going to migrate people to it. It's very hard for us to build a bridge to a city that doesn't exist yet. So I think come with us, and we've actually had many folks volunteer to help. So stay tuned, but we're going to have to define a lot more of what 2.0 is before we can build migration path. We are committed to help. We don't know what it will look like yet, so just stay tuned.
I think rephrasing it, we're committed to a migration path, we just don't know what it's going to look like yet.
I think it was me who freaked out people when at ngconf we got this question, and I answered it, and I basically said that we're building Angular 2 to be the best Angular we can build with the technologies that are available to us, so like including ES6 and the components, and we are not concerned with the migration path. And that freaks out people because they understood there is no migration path, there will be no migration path. That's not what I meant. What I was trying to say is that our intent is really to just build the best Angular possible and then figure out the migration path. Because if you start building something for the future and you keep the migration path as one of your requirements, one of the things you want to put into the design process, then I think that kind of constrains what you can build, and you will just make an incremental change. So you will build something that is maybe 50% better, maybe 100%. Drop many of these artificial constraints and look at the development process from the other end. What is the best thing we can build? Let's build it, and then let's figure out how to get all these existing applications to that new version. I think the end result can be much better. Like it's a balancing act. We understand that. and we care about migration path, and we are committed to one, but we really want to build the best thing we can and then figure out how to get there for existing applications.
All right, awesome, thank you. So another question about migration path, and I think this is a question in our moderator, but what can we do in our applications today that would, like, and I know that the migration path isn't very clear, but is there that you know right off the bat that we can do today in our applications on 1.3 that will help in a migration path?
Brad, do you want to take this one?
I think like we don't want to give you bad, and since we haven't built 2.0 yet, we don't know what to tell you. And as soon as we do know something, we will.
That's
I think it's worth taking into account the fact that one of the beautiful things about Angular, which is what drew me into it in the first place, is that it's built on really solid software engineering practices. It's designed to encourage you to build testable code and modular code. And I think if you're building your applications, your controllers and your directives in ways which minimize the coupling between other parts of the system, then you'll find that those bits of business logic will be much easier to migrate in the future because they are isolated and well defined. You know, if you look back to before Angular, you're so attached to things like using the DOM as a model that to actually move to Angular from jQuery is a massive conceptual effort. Whereas moving from Angular 1 to Angular 2, there's not as big a conceptual change. It's more about taking advantage of the new technology that's available. And one thing I wanted to say was that when we do start releasing some of the demos of the new router, for the back port of the router, sorry for those Americans out there, it's really interesting to see how it's actually using code which is also going to be running in Angular 2. Yeah, so Rob Eisenberg is writing the router for Angular 2, but Brian is basically working very closely with him, and there's a lot of overlap. Many of the concepts which you're going to see in the backport of the router are going to be good patterns for you to follow going forward for Angular 2, I think.
Awesome. Well, I'll be watching that project for sure. Thank you. All right, Todd, unless there's anything else, we'll just go ahead and go into Q&A. Is there anything else you guys wanted to talk about before we move into Q&A? All right, take it away, Todd.
Awesome. So you probably get asked this every day. The most upvoted question that we had is he's abbreviated it to too long, didn't read. When will 2.0 be production ready?
When it's ready, we'll tell you.
So we're not going to set a date, and everyone wants us to set a date. But what we will do is we're going to be really public about progress. So you're going to see weekly meeting notes from us. You're going to see demos. You're going to see more and more code. We're developing in the public, and you should get involved in things you care about. So come help us create it. Come chime in on issue 133 if you care about syntax. Start a new issue if you don't see one, and we'll just look forward to you being part of it. You'll know if you're part of the process.
I feel this issue 133 is very infamous, isn't it? So I haven't seen it. I'm going to have to check it out. So the other part, I think this guy managed to sneak in another question, which he's worried about if he goes and builds a new application that in a year or so time, what arguments can he give to a manager that to use Angular now and not have to rewrite it in a year or so, breaking changes.
So there's an interesting property of the web in that it's backwards compatible, and our Angular 0.9 still runs today, I think. So you can pick whatever version. Like if you want to develop for IE8, you can still run on Angular 1.2, and that's going to be valid forever into the future. So I think you can pick the version of Angular that makes most sense for your target platform, with the knowledge that you won't get some of the advancements that we're talking about in speed and scalability and the tooling. And so that can be the driving factor that companies can make their choices based on what features they want to take advantage of, and they can invest as they will. They're not going to be forced to upgrade. We're going to be supporting 1.3 for a while, so you'll still get bug fixes, security updates, and there's still quite a few features there to come there.
All right, awesome, thank you. Another question that was highly upvoted was, you mentioned once on Twitter that Polymer web components will be in Angular.0. Is this still planned? So I know we talked about how web components was a big piece in the design decisions for 2.0, but I think the question is more like, will the built-in directives be using web components or Polymer specifically? Yeah.
Igor, do you want to take it a try?
Yeah, I can take this one. So by design, we are targeting web components, and Polymer is built on top of web components. And the Polymer project is kind of complicated by the fact that it's two things. It's polyfills for many of these new web standards that are coming, and they build a suite of polyfills, and on top of that, they also build an opinionated layer of library or framework, I'm not sure what is the best description, that allows you to utilize this web components APIs to build reusable components. So by us targeting web components, so we're targeting the lower level of Polymer, we are by definition compatible with Polymer. And this is true for Angular 2. This is not true by Angular 1 because in some corner cases you can get Polymer working with Angular 1, but it's not going to work completely smoothly. Angular 2 will work really well with Polymer. We looked at many of the web technologies and we kind of picked and choose which ones are those that we want to use. So out of the whole web component specification, which is an umbrella specification for many smaller specifications, we are using many of them, not all of them, and we had to make some hard choices about which of the standards make sense for us and where it's better for us to not use the standard API and still do something that is we think is either to a performance advantage or it makes the application architecture better. So for the most part, we're using web components internally, but we're not going full in the way Polymer does.
Okay, cool. I saw I think it was in one of the design docs. It had a at directive, and then inside it said shadow DOM true. Is this kind of like a guess on how you would enable the web components, or is that just a?
That's just one. So, like as I said, web components has many pieces. Shadow DOM is one of them. We definitely want to be able to take advantage of Shadow DOM because we think it's a very nice technology that allows you to compose your components in a better way. So there's going to be a way to use Shadow DOM. Right now we are thinking of an opt-in model because until all the browsers support Shadow DOM, there is a big performance penalty to pay for using polyfill, but maybe this will change in the future. We'll see. For now, you can opt-in if you're targeting just the Chrome browser. If you are not on Chrome, we will have a code that emulates Shadow DOM, so we'll make the DOM behave like if Shadow DOM was present, but it's not going to be fully spec compliant. It's going to give you most of the advantages, not all of them, but we think that in this case it's one of those places where we're not willing to trade off performance for being fully spec compliant.
I think I'd like to add to it is that one of the things that we have in Angular, because Angular kind of 1 preceded web components, is that we made up our own vocabulary of things like transclude and so on. And in Angular 2.0, we have aligned the vocabulary with the web components. And so whether or not your browser has a shadow DOM and with that light DOM and all the other pieces, you can reason and talk about your components in the web component vocabulary. Which I think is going to go a long way of getting the people in the right mindset for the future.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
We've got a pretty. I think we'll probably make this one of the last ones. So Angular Dart, I know that project was came up a couple of years ago. I think. Isn't ECMAScript 6 already solving many of the problems that Dart was kind of there to address? That's one of the next questions.
It's a good question. I mean, I think so. There is a Dart team, and I think this is more a question for the Dart language team. We do use it and support it, and we have large teams at Google using Dart. And for us on Angular, this is a language option, much like TypeScript or CoffeeScript or anything else is. It's a little unique because to take advantage of Angular, we had a special version that was compiled for Dart. And so we do pay them special attention, but we want it to be one of the options that you can choose. And if you like Dart, you can also use Angular on it.
Cool, that's good enough for me, yeah. Awesome. So we do only have a couple of minutes left, and I'd really like to ask these next two questions, if that's okay. We can be brief. So first is, what will be the recommended way to handle modules in an Angular 2 app? For example, should I start learning how to compile ES6 modules into AMD with Tracer and load them with require.js?
Yes, that's a good way to start. The TC39 committee agreed on standardizing the module syntax, so it's at this point I feel pretty comfortable about recommending the module syntax to developers. So that's something you can get familiar with. There are different ways to transpile that syntax into something that runs in. There's the option to use require.js, common.js. There's even ES6 module loader polyfill that is still in works, but there are many options. It's definitely one of those things that you can start with today.
Cool. And then just to finish us up here, maybe this will not be as short as I hope, but could you elaborate more on why scope and controllers are being removed in 2.0? Seems to me like two core concepts of Angular, and even though they can be tricky, they give a lot of flexibility and simplicity.
Yeah, so I recommend that whoever asked the question watches the presentation that we did at NG Europe, because all of these things were explained with a reason why.
And we also recommend that if people are writing slide decks, don't use tombstones on things that are only getting simpler.
we learned some lessons then. One of them is don't use tombstones. The other one was have the video available right away before people can jump to conclusions. But to address the question head on, one thing that we realized was that controllers and templates are really just like these half-baked components, and if we make building components super easy and syntactically very succinct, then why not just have a single concept, then have controllers, and then have components? If you make components simple, then you can just use components in place of controllers, and component itself will kind of serve the role of the controller. And for scopes, it's the API, the way you interact with the scope is going away. The concept of the scope is not going away. So the scope in Angular 1x has many different roles, and we kind of separated these roles into 3 different components, and that allows us to simplify the system significantly. And rather than having an explicit scope object that you get to interact with, we will have implicit scoping, which is more familiar to developers. So like in JavaScript, for example, there's implicit scoping. You don't need to think about creating a new scope or having a reference to a scope. You just create a variable, and that variable is created on the right scope. And this is how Angular 2 is going to work. So the concept is going to be there, just the way you interact with it is going to be different.
Let me just add something to it. So I think what people are getting, there's 2 parts, right? There is the controller as the concept, and there's the ng-controller as the directive. So ng-controller as the directive is going away, but the controller as a concept we love so much that actually we made everything a controller. The component is a controller, the directive is going to be a controller.
Don't tell them that!
Well, hold on, let me just finish. As a controller, it's like saying everything is an object. Like you can just drop the word because it's implied that, yes, we know it's all the same thing. So conceptually, this actually fits rather very nicely. The second part is, once you have this particular thing, you can kind of realize that, well, scope and the controller instance is really one and the same thing. And you could just get rid of scope and use the controller instance as the replacement for it. And everything just kind of fits beautifully in place, and it's better. So don't get hung up on the words and what they mean. Rather, do some investigation as to how actually these things work. And I'm pretty confident that you will like it.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. And one thing that I forgot to mention, I wanted to, I just listened to the Adventures in Angular podcast this morning, and they talked to several of you guys. It was an awesome podcast, so I'd recommend to our viewers to go listen to that. And one of the things that was mentioned in there that I thought was good was, Igor, I guess you're working with John Papa right now on the style guide, is that right?
Yes.
And so I would recommend look at that style guide, and you'll find a lot of really useful styles that I imagine would help with building your app that in such a way that makes it easier to migrate potentially.
Yeah. I'm actually meeting with John next week to finalize the review of the style guide. So we'll make some announcements after that. So stay tuned.
Awesome.
I would like to add two more things. There are two interesting events that developers should definitely know about. One is ngconf, that is happening in March. I think it's March 5th and 6th in Salt Lake City, Utah. The last round of tickets is going up for sale next Wednesday. So I think that's November 19th. If you want to come and have a lot of fun with us, you should definitely get your tickets next Wednesday. You should know about is we are running ng Fix-It. This is an event where we will invite some of the developers who want to help us fix Angular 1x, implement some features, maybe fix bugs, maybe help us triage or improve documentation. The event is going to be in person in San Francisco. This is our first actual attempt at something like this. So if it works out, we will expand it to other cities, or maybe we'll do it virtually. We'll see. The event is on next Saturday, November 22nd, from 9 in the morning until 3 p.m. And it's happening in San Francisco. If you are interested, please check out our Twitter and G+, Google Plus feed. There are links on how to subscribe, sign up for the event. So if that's your thing, then I'll be happy to see you there.
Awesome, and we'll if you can get us those links, we'll put those in our show notes in the YouTube video.
Okay,
so,
let's do that.
Yeah, cool. All right, Todd, do you want to close us off?
Yeah, cool. Really appreciate you guys coming on. Really had a great time. Thanks a lot. We've got the next show coming up with John Lindquist, egghead.io. You could probably mostly know him as. So we're going to be looking at hitting the ground running with AngularJS as a tactical title change, Igor. So yeah, you can catch us then. We've if you visit ng-air.github.io, we've that's all the details for that are on there, and you can start asking questions now. I think there's quite a lot of questions on there. You can also RSVP to the event on Google+. So yeah, the numbers keep going up and up. So looking forward to that one. Thanks again, guys, for coming on. It's been really great. I've learned a lot as well. So
thanks for having us. Can't wait to see the future episodes, guys.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.